Hello folks, Rod Machado here. I'd like to share with you an idea that I learned many years ago, and it was one of the most powerful ideas for reducing the anxiety that one might experience in flying, as well as making flying a whole lot more fun. Are you ready for it? Here it comes. Wait for it. Wait for it. You are not a scheduled airline. I'll say that one more time. You, as a private pilot, even with an instrument rating, commercial rating, or flight instructor rating, are not a scheduled airline. And by that I mean, when we acquire a private pilot license, sometimes we believe that we can take an airplane and go anywhere we want, anytime we want, under any conditions. At least that's what the airplane salesman said. In other words, the person who sold us that airplane. And we can fly it basically with impunity, and that is just not true. If you believe that, that's like believing that you can buy a bag of deep-fried pork skins, go home, and reassemble the pig in your apartment. That's just not true. You see, if the engineers of the 1950s knew how we were flying our airplanes today, they would be spinning in their graves, and it'd be a bunch of little rotisseries just spinning around underground 6 feet, because those folks would be just absolutely shocked with what we're doing with our airplanes. You know, we have NEXRAD, we have de-ice, anti-ice equipment on small general aviation airplanes. And by the way, those airplanes, many of them are not certified to fly in known icing conditions, but we do. And sometimes we use NEXRAD to tactically navigate around thunderstorms. And folks, that is just not what it was meant to be used for. It's to be used for a strategic device in avoiding convective weather. Well, the point here is this, and I know I sound like my dad. I remember when I was young, my dad, before I went to school, my dad said, "Hey, I got something to tell you, young man. If you get held under detention or expelled, I'm not going to stand up for you. If you get thrown in jail for drinking, I am not going to bail you out. If you get a girl pregnant, you got to marry her." And I'm thinking to myself, that is a heck of a thing to tell a first grader. But that was my dad. So at the risk of sounding like my dad, who was a very wise man, I want you to consider this. You are probably more likely to be involved in a weather-related accident with another person on board. And in particular, it's more likely that the people that can get you killed in an airplane, in terms of weather-related accidents, are your friends. I know, sounds strange, doesn't it? Your friends. Your friends are more likely to get you killed. Now you think, why is that? Well, there's a very good reason for that. And that is, we are empathetic people. And we don't want to disappoint other people. Even though we know that that may happen, the fact is we don't want to do it. We don't enjoy seeing other people disappointed. Well, we put another person in our airplane, we take off, and perhaps the weather is too bad to continue. We have to return home or land at an intermediate stop, perhaps cancel the flight. We don't want to have to deal with our passengers' discomfort. Well, if that is the case, then I want you to try this strategy I used as a young flight instructor to deal with people that perhaps were insistent on doing something that I didn't want to do. And I found this very effective as a young flight instructor. What I would say to them is this. They might say, "Hey, I want to use my airplane to fly solo to Las Vegas." And I would never let a student fly solo to Las Vegas because I know they'd fly there, and depending on their gambling disposition, they may come home in a bus. In other words, they lost the FBO's airplane on a gambling bet in Las Vegas. Anyway, no overnight flights to Las Vegas. And I would say to that student, "Hey, look, here are my standards." That's the word. I say, here are my standards. And the student may look at me and say, "Whoa, what do you mean?" Because when you say the word standards, that has a certain amount of gravitas. It's something that sticks in people's mind when they were young, when their dad told them that they couldn't do something because this is the family standard. So it's a word that sticks with them. And when I say these are my standards, and people typically don't argue against your standards, or they might, but You don't have to argue with them if you don't want. These are your standards. These are the things you stick with. And I say to my student, I say, look, these are my standards. Nobody flies an airplane solo to other than the places I want them to fly. Give or take. I'm a reasonable guy, but not to Las Vegas. And when you say that, you've automatically made an impression on people. And therefore, you're more likely to be able to convince people that, if you had to cancel a flight, stop midway, return to the airport, that it's the right thing to do. Yes, they're probably going to be disappointed because they have to go back to the departure airport. But as they say in Spanish, tough taco, because you are more concerned about their safety than you are about their feelings. Now, here's another idea I'd like you to consider that will give you a tremendous advantage in terms of not being persuaded to please the people that are on board your airplane and to act rationally when you have to. And yes, I think we all have to agree that sometimes with people on board the airplane, again, in our own empathetic nature, we want to please them. Perhaps we will do things that logic and good judgment says we shouldn't do. So you need to find a way to reduce that type of temptation. And here's an excellent way to do it. This works very well. And before you get on an airplane with someone, you stand your passenger by the side of the airplane or passengers, and you ask them this question. You ask them if there's any reason that they would be unable to deal with the disappointment or difficulty of returning to the airport when you're halfway through your journey because of bad weather or any other typical problem that may occur during the flight. And if they say no, fantastic, because what you've done is you've received their commitment that they are not going to be unable to deal with having to turn back to the airport. Oh, will they be disappointed if they have to return back to the airport because of, bad weather, typically? And yeah, they're going to be disappointed. But if I may offer my most valuable and useful psychological retort to that, so what? Your objective is not to make them happy. Your objective first and primarily is to ensure their safety. Once you've done that, then you can work on their happiness. Now, you see, there's a clever aspect of this that most people don't consider, and that is when you ask people whether or not they'd be able to deal with the difficulty or disappointment at having to return to the airport, and they agree with you, in essence, what they've done, and this is very, very, very powerful, they have become a partner in the decision-making. In other words, they become part of the decision-making process. So if you say to them, folks, I'm sorry, we're going to have to turn back. There's a big thunderstorm cloud out there. In fact, they're all over the place. That was not forecast. We didn't see that coming. We're going back home. And yeah, they're going to be disappointed. And you're going to be disappointed. But the fact is, you will be less likely to be influenced by having to turn back and experiencing their disappointment by virtue of having them make that agreement with you ahead of time. So, in order to act like the pilot we want to be, we have to have some way of dealing with temptation. And now you have two ways. If for some reason you have to deviate en route to another airport or return to the original airport because of weather, low fuel, or whatever, then you tell your passengers that you have to do this because these are your standards. And that's a word that has a powerful influence and effect on other people. And the second thing you do is before you ever depart in an airplane, you line your passengers up and ask them the question, is there any reason why you would not be able to deal with the disappointment or the disruption if you had to return to the departure airport or land, en route at another airport, and see what they say. If they all agree, then what you've done is you've made them part of the decision-making process. And therefore, it's much more difficult for them to complain that, you're going to have to cancel the flight. Oh, they'll still complain, but that doesn't matter. The fact is that it means you will experience less pressure. And since you are in charge of their safety, and that's what's important. So good flying to you, and may you always land as soft as a butterfly with sore feet.